Good. All right. So we're going to hear from Susan again later on to talk about next steps in the project. So we have a wonderful array of speakers. Just a few words on the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime. It was launched back in March 2020 with two core objectives regarding gaps in our legal frameworks for tackling wildlife trafficking and for regulating wildlife trade. And as regards wildlife trade, our objective has been to raise awareness of serious gaps in international and national legal frameworks for mitigating the health risk posed by the trade in certain wild animals and related markets, and to advocate for necessary changes to the international legal framework. Our focus at the international level has been on those aspects of the pandemics agreement that relate to preventing future pandemics, and in particular preventing pathogen spillover from wild animals to people at source, which is also known as primary prevention, as well as taking a One Health approach. But we've also focused very much on the national level in supporting states adopt national measures to better mitigate the risk of emerging zoonotic diseases and to enshrine the One Health approach at the national level. And all of this work at the national level has been enabled by this wonderful GIZ-funded project. And it's this national level work that is our focus today. However, I think it's also worth noting that this work will also be highly relevant to states in meeting obligations contained in the recently adopted pandemics agreement, once it is open for ratification and comes into force, especially those articles on One Health and pandemics prevention, including upstream prevention. Now I'd like to move on to our main speakers, and I'd like to start by welcoming Susan Lillis. She's going to give us an introduction to the project. Susan serves as the Executive Vice President of the ICCF Group, and ICCF was also a founding member of the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime, and Susan's been a member of its steering group right from the outset. Susan, over to you.
Thank you, John, and welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. It's exciting to be part of this webinar, and it was very exciting to be part of the project. So I'll give you a little background and overview of the project before I turn it over to James and Paula. So background, when CITES entered into force in July of 1975, as most of you know, it created the first global framework for international trade in certain species of fauna and flora in order to avoid overexploitation through trade. Half a century later, legal and illegal wildlife trade have both dramatically expanded, and we now know the stakes are high, not only for the survival of species, but for public health and risk of zoonotic disease. But CITES doesn't deal with this health risk other than through partnerships with other mandated organizations and non-binding recommendations and decisions. We've learned that 8 of the 10 most traded species capable of hosting WHO blueprint diseases reside in Angola, Botswana, and Zambia, where there are unfortunately some weak or fragmented domestic laws that leave loopholes, allowing high-risk trade to slip through the cracks. So as to address this, as John mentioned, End Wildlife Crime, ICCF Group, and Legal Atlas conducted a 2-year project entitled Preventing Future Zoonotic Pandemics, Strengthening National Legal Frameworks and International Cooperation, and again, funded by GIZ through the International Alliance Against Health Risks and Wildlife Trade. And the overarching goal of the project was to identify and to address potential legal loopholes in the national legislation of these 3 target countries, again, Angola, Botswana, and Zambia, related to zoonotic disease prevention and control within the context of wildlife trade. So on the 50th anniversary of CITES, the partners in the project were proud to launch 5 groundbreaking reports produced under the project. They'll be discussed in more detail by James and Paula, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. But just to note that as the closeout of the project, the caucuses from the 3 countries and numerous other caucuses throughout Africa came together in Luanda to chart a collaborative path forward, which also echoes the spirit of the newly adopted WHO pandemic agreement with its One Health focus. So as we learned that by strengthening national laws and fostering regional cooperation, we can better protect wildlife and keep people safe. We've seen really great success with this project, and working closely with the caucuses in the countries and the wider region. We're now seeking additional funding to enable the team to do the same work in additional countries, as well as implementing some of the what was learned in the 3 target countries. So with that, I will turn it back to you, John, to introduce the next speakers.
Thanks, Susan. Excellent overview. Really appreciate that. And we're now going to move to look at the outcomes of the project itself and a demonstration of the Legal Atlas platform. Got 3 fantastic speakers. They were all lead authors of the various reports that have been produced. We've got James, or Jim Wingard. He's the director of Legal Atlas. Legal Atlas is also an international champion of the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime. We've got Paula Lopez, who is the legal advisor to Angola for this project. And we've got Dalia Conde, and she has served as the Legal Atlas science advisor for the project. They're going to share this presentation amongst the 3 of them on the outcomes of the project, and we're going to kick off with Jim. Jim, over to you.
Thank you very much, John, for that introduction, and Susan for the introduction to the project. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I'm going to start off by introducing some of the initial aspects of the project. I'll then turn it over to Dr. Dalia Conde, who is our science advisor. She'll add a few words on the issue of zoonotics and wildlife trade, of course. And then Paul and I together will talk about the results of the review that we conducted on the national legislation for the 3 target jurisdictions. So again, that's Angola, Botswana, and Zambia. And I will also cover what I think are some next steps from what we have learned so far. So let me go ahead and share my screen, if I can do that. Everybody can see my screen, I'm assuming? Yeah? Okay, so once again, this is the presentation on the results of this project, Preventing Future Zoonotic Pandemics, Strengthening National Legal Frameworks and International Cooperation. And the organizations that you see below are the ones responsible for it. We're going to cover a little, as I said, on zoonotic disease, a little bit on understanding their impacts. Dalia will speak to that. We're then going to look at the current legislative landscape for the 3 countries that we were reviewing, and of course we'll comment on the important need for harmonization at the national level, not just with international agreements. And with that, I'm going to turn it over very quickly to Dalia. And if you just let me know when you need to advance the screen, Dalia, I'll help you through. But Dr. Dalia Conde for a few words on zoonotic disease.
Hello, thank you, Jim. Thank you, John and Susan. Well, first of all, it's important to define what is a zoonotic disease. As the WHO and WOA define it, is a disease that can be transmitted from a vertebrate and a non-human vertebrate to humans. And it is extremely important to understand why emerging zoonotic diseases are key in when we talk about wildlife trade and wildlife crime. So we know that 75% of these emerging infectious diseases come from wildlife or animals like cows and sheep. It doesn't have to be just wildlife, but what is key is why do we refer always to emerging infectious diseases and not to any type of disease? So next one. And the importance of emerging zoonotic diseases is that those diseases are new for humans to our immune system. So we haven't co-evolved with these bacteria or viruses, or let's call it pathogens, over the evolutionary time. So when we have an emergent disease, the symptoms can be often deadly or very, very, very strong. Some examples is the Spanish flu that caused around 50 million deaths in 1918. For example, the Hong Kong flu that caused more than 700,000 deaths in the 68. And well, let's just don't forget that it was just very few years ago that we have over 7 million deaths reported in 2023 by the WHO. And we had, I want to mention the economic impact, because we have more than 12.5 trillion losses globally. It was a huge economic impact. So that's why these diseases are so dangerous, emerging zoonotic diseases. However, if we think about all zoonotic emerging diseases, next one. Next slide. It's very important not to be overwhelmed, because there are some that are more dangerous than others. There are many emerging zoonotic diseases for which we have a cure, we have vaccines, we have methods to counteract, and very good ways of prevention. However, the WHO blueprint diseases are diseases that have been prioritized by the WHO, and are those diseases that can cause a pandemic or an epidemic for which a cure does not exist. And all these diseases have, all the WHO blueprint diseases have a zoonotic origin, of course, and we did an analysis, not a recent, but we have reanalyzed everything. And what we have now is that we know which species are in the international wildlife trade, regulated, of course, and we have information of illegal wildlife trade that is harder to obtain, because not all the illegal traded animals are confiscated on in seizures. And this is exactly what Susan was mentioning, that through this analysis we can identify those diseases that had been prioritized to cause a pandemic or an epidemic for which a cure does not exist, that at the same time can be in the wildlife trade. Next one. So here we have just 3 species. So if you were wondering why the reports have the pictures of these 3 species, these are just some of the species that we found in this study that I had the privilege to lead with a team of experts. Those are 3 of the species that are in these countries that were among the top 10 species that are more widely traded. Next one. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. So in this slide, what we can see is that which are the species globally traded that can carry one or more than one pathogen of these 10 blueprint diseases. And just to mention very briefly, the blueprint diseases include, for example, Ebola, Zika virus, COVID-19, SARS, MERS. So are diseases that, even if there is a lot of priorities on research and there are a lot of priorities to develop vaccines, and for some have been developed, like COVID, these diseases have a huge potential to be spread through wildlife trade. And 8 of these species that can carry this pathogen occur in the area that you can see in yellow. So this was a very important way to prioritize, as Susan mentioned, where to start doing the legal analysis. So science was just a very small piece of the puzzle, and if we don't have the legal aspect, we cannot have a good prevention mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you, Dalia, for that overview. The slides that you're looking at right now are taken from the Legal Atlas platform that we use to essentially georeference the resource issue in question. In this case, these were the species that were capable of hosting WHO blueprint diseases, but it overlays on a map that also georeferences all of the laws that apply to that particular space, right? So you can see as I click through these, the various species that were identified by Dalia and a few more that she didn't mention just now. But they all occur in this region. It's not just, of course, Angola, Botswana, and Zambia. You see several other countries. This is a map that doesn't show very well, where leopard currently occur, but you can see that many of, if not most of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa are basically host to the same species, and making this whole area, the whole region, a region of concern for this particular issue. And the major result from the research was that what we're really looking at is a new kind of hotspot where wildlife disease, in particular these blueprint diseases, and wildlife trade converge, creating effectively a new understanding of the threat around what may be the next pandemic. So we took a look at the international and national legal frameworks. Our primary focus in this effort was to look at the national laws, ultimately because no matter how strong or well developed our approach at the international level is, ultimately the hard work of legislating for this issue happens at the national level. And our goal was to take a look and see at that national level, what are the key tools, what's needed, where are the major gaps, and what's required to harmonize the laws between these different countries. And our main concern, of course, was that the ultimately legal gaps become health gaps, right? There are a number of international health-related regulations, including now, of course, the pandemics agreement, when that comes into force. But as I said, our main focus was the national legal frameworks, and we did a fairly extensive review of what laws actually apply. And briefly, I've just listed three in very general categories: animal health regulations, food safety standards, public health laws. But for every country that we reviewed, we had roughly, I would say, 30 different pieces of legislation that play at least some role in managing either animal health or wildlife trade, or any of the enforcement authorities responsible for that legislation. So every country that we looked at, we were looking at a fair amount of legislation. And what we noticed, of course, is that all of the countries reviewed have some gaps. But a word about how we do that for those of you who are not familiar with Legal Atlas. One of the things that we do is we, together with legal experts, for this particular case, animal health experts, veterinarians, wildlife trade, wildlife crime experts, we look at what are effectively the key components to legislation, the key actions that are required, and for which legislation is required, in order to basically look at those pieces of the puzzle that really have sort of an outsized impact on the way the law works. And in this particular instance, we defined 41 legal best practices, but that came after a fairly extensive review led largely by Dr. Conde on what are all of the government and non-governmental entities that are exposed to or responsible for wildlife trade, and in particular some aspect of animal health. One of the reports that we created is dedicated to that. It's a legislative benchmarking report. It talks about all of the reasons effectively why certain entities need an improved approach, if you will, to managing wildlife trade and disease at the same time. This first report, it's been published and you can find it online. The next one that we did was the report that focused just on what are the legal best practices. So report number 2 draws on report number 1 and reduces that, or reduced it down to 41 key elements that we reviewed. And after that, we then applied those 41 legal best practices to each of the target countries and have produced a report for each one of those individual countries. And again, all of these have been published and are available online. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Paula, but Paula, you and I can share the explanations on this. What we'd like to do is walk you through what these legal best practices were, at least some of the major ones. It's a lot to cover if we try and do all 41. But you can see in this particular screen kind of the results, and you should immediately notice that there is a fair amount of red and yellow. So just to orient you on the colors, the darker green means that the country in question has what we consider a best practice. In other words, we have designed an inquiry into the legislation, and when reviewing their laws, they had effectively everything that we were looking for, right? Those that are a lighter green are essentially also the same as a best practice, but we maintain them as a lighter green to indicate that during the analysis, we're required to do at least some interpretation. That what we found in the law likely achieves what we're looking for, but of course there was some interpretation, and that makes it up to further debate potentially in the future. So dark green is a best practice, light green is a good practice. The yellow indicates any instance where we found a gap of some kind. Some gaps can be larger than others. The coloring doesn't give you an indication of what that gap, how important that particular gap is. From a legal perspective, small gaps can mean large problems. So we didn't try and quantify in this particular exercise, the value of a particular gap in this instance, right? And then the red indicates instances where we did not find any legal content on point. Right. So from here, what I'd like to do is turn this over to Paula Lopez, our legal analyst and coordinator there in Angola, and have her walk through some of these results. Paula?
Hear me?
Yes, now we've got you.
Now we can.
Okay. I was
Okay.
thanking you everyone for this opportunity to present this amazing work. As Jim was saying, going straight to the point, we analyzed those 3 jurisdictions, and from what you could see from the table before, there's a lot of good work that has been done for those countries in those countries, meaning that overall those countries have necessary legislative coverage for the issue of animal health. However, as you can see also from the table, there's very important red markers that can make implementation and the achievement of the overall results that we want with prevention very difficult topic. One of those aspects that we highlighted and is common within the 3 countries is the lack of the One Health approach within this legislation. In practice, what we experience, especially here in Angola, there's some level of cooperative approach to animal diseases, but in any of the 22 most direct legislation, we could not see any approach to any legal representation of this approach. This means that in practical terms, in some instances, we cannot recruit the collaboration of the other entities which are relevant for this topic to address this issue. This issue is being directly addressed in the latest HWO document. So we are expecting Angola to adhere and adjust legislation as soon as possible. Another relevant gap within the study was the immediate responses to any kind of outbreak. This means that we found many gaps in legislation regarding to surveillance and reporting, also in immediate response. Although these countries have some kind of provisions regarding response, they didn't demonstrate immediate response like we would ideally see in relation to, for instance, airports or any other border points. This is an issue that is common within the three countries. Another very important issue, and I would say is the source of many of these gaps, is the lack of capacity building and training across all stakeholders involved in this topic, starting from the legislative approach to the implementation. We observe that there's a lack of knowledge and sometimes understanding on the legislative bodies to address this topic and address in a manner that involves all the ministries relevant to this problematic. And also we noticed that within the implementation parties, the vets, the doctors, there's also lack of coordination to address this topic, and also lack of training and education and information to the public. So these are the main points that in practical terms would mean very relevant and negative impacts on the resolution of the issues related to the animal health. And these are the topics that would be the main points for recommendations. But not all was bad, as I mentioned before, in terms of application, in terms of compliance with international agreements, in terms of definition of key terms. Most of the countries are well equipped to manage this problematic, and most of the countries also have a well-designated authority to be the overseeing body for this topic. So these are the good examples that we could gather from the three countries. We also mentioned about the partial gaps. It's regarding the surveillance, prevention, and response. As I mentioned, most of the provisions regarding to the response are there, but we could not see the immediate response for main issues to prevent. And for instance, as I mentioned, the ones related to points of entry, since we are talking about transboundary problematic issues. In terms of the gaps, all the countries didn't recognize the One Health approach. We can be very useful to address transversally all the topics and issues that arise with One Health approach. And we saw, just to give one example, we saw that all of those countries have lack of provisions regarding the implementation of enforcement of rules related to animal health issues. Also, those countries don't have the necessary place-based or species-based flags, red flags, to identify potentially dangerous source of transmission and contamination, which can trigger transboundary contamination and avoid prevention and immediate response as we would wish to happen. Can you just go to the gaps? Yes. Yes, we also saw that within the, especially within the border points, there's no effective response measures or detection measures, which can cause a lot of transboundary contamination, as we can see it usually happens between Namibia and Angola. I'll pass over to you, James, to address the cost benefits and the way forward on this topic. I'm looking forward to questions on to further elaborate the discovery that we found with the study.
Thank you very much, Paula, for that review. We will reserve time for question and answer, and there's a lot that we obviously can't cover in a presentation like this, so maybe in the question and answer we'll have an opportunity to cover some other issues. This slide is from, I believe, Dalia, this is from your report, correct? This is the, Dalia, are you there?
Yes, this is for the report. It's not the latest, but yes, this is for the report we produce.
Okay.
In which,
so yeah, and the two messages behind this, of course, is, and we all know this, that prevention costs less than the cure. But it's also to say that this is a manageable problem. We need good legal foundations, right? And we have, as we showed, already a good start, because animal health is not something new. Animal health in the context of wildlife trade and wildlife health, these are a little bit new to law, right? But when it comes to the actual exposure and the risks associated with this particular slide is illustrating, I believe this is, Dalia, if you want to speak to it, this is confiscations, right? Yeah, go ahead and speak to the slide a little
very
bit more.
briefly to save you time. So what we're seeing, all the circles that overlap in total are 224. But the most important is 210, virus host. But the most important is we found 126 species that can carry any of these virus hosts that are identified in the wildlife trade, legal and illegal, that we found in seizures. And this doesn't cover only CITES, covers lemmings and other databases. So really briefly, we know that it's only 126 species that can carry these WHO diseases. And the diseases, you can see it in figure B. You see the names of the diseases that go from the Rift Valley fever to the Marburg Beers disease. And the number of species host are, there are species that can carry more than one disease or multiple diseases. So that's what you can observe. And in colors, you know, in blue or red, if it's regulated trade and confiscations, or confiscations only, or regulated trade only. So with this, I leave you the floor, James.
Okay, very good. So, you know, what we're looking at is, or the message that we would like to convey is that while strong legal foundations is a starting point, actually understanding the actual problem itself helps us to tailor what we need and how we approach it, at least from a legal perspective, to the actual problem itself, right? So beyond this, really the way forward, and we'll leave time here for question and answer, but the way forward is, for us immediately, we would love to be able to, or we should be moving from analysis to actual legislation. And I believe Honorable Kiwanda will speak in a moment to that issue. But in each one of the countries that we did a review, we actually also created what we refer to as a legislative agenda that for that one country says, look, these are the additional key elements that are missing from your regulatory framework. And now would be the time to work on legislation to fill those gaps. It may be in existing legislation. There may be a need for new regulations. Those play a significant role, obviously, in the implementing side. But it would really be the moment to be able to create laws that really respond to this. We only did 3 countries, though, in this, and a survey of 3 is not really a survey. I'm convinced, of course, that we will find similar patterns, just because we've studied law from a number of angles for wildlife trade, for other areas of animal health, including aquatic animal health, with the World Organization on Animal Health, and we know that we find these patterns fairly quickly in the law. But one of the goals that we have in mind when we do this approach is not just to find problems, it's also to find good examples. And so covering countries that are not necessarily related to each other in terms of trade or their legal systems, et cetera, is still highly valuable, because you find good examples of a legal approach that provides a foundation to a particular action, such as surveillance objectives, communication, even things like capacity building, training. The support in law drives budgets. It creates a clear mandate. It supports effectively the improvement of the agencies that are responsible for managing this issue. So more countries is something that really should be done. And of course, more analysis. There's more that can be done to look at other areas that represent potential hotspots because of the convergence of wildlife trade and the species that are hosts, WHO host, disease hosts, as well as those, and look at the gaps in the laws around those jurisdictions as well. So for us, the way forward really is analysis to law, more countries to support the better understanding of where the gaps occur across the global landscape, and of course more analysis to understand more the problem set itself, where are the priorities, and what more can be done.
And James, I don't know if I
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and I just wanted to add that something that we have discussed as well is that we identified in the report which are the main exporter countries and importing countries of these species, not only where the habitats are, but where they are. And those countries and special places are key areas for this type of legal gap analysis. I think that's one of the key areas to move forward. And I think it will be a great way to prevent a next pandemic if we can find those gaps and encourage legislation to move forward.
Thank you, Dalia, for those additional comments. And at this point, I think, John, we would like to turn the floor back over to you to introduce the next speaker.
Great. Thank you very much, Jim. And thanks to you and Dalia and Paula. That was a fantastic overview of the various reports that have come out of this project. Really helpful. I think, Jim, one little catchphrase you used that stuck with me, legal gaps become health gaps. And I think that's a neat way of summarizing a lot of what you were just saying to us in your closing remarks. So thanks very much. Brilliant. And we'll come to Q&A at the end, should we have some time. But now I would like to move on. As you know, we have 3 countries here that have been involved in this project, Angola, Botswana, and Zambia. And now we're going to turn to some perspectives from the targeted jurisdictions. And it's my great honour to introduce you to you and to invite the Honourable Kawana MP, Member of Parliament in Botswana, who is the co-chair of the Botswana Conservation Parliamentary Caucus, to share his perspectives with us all today. Honourable Kawana, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My apologies for getting here late. I had problems with my instrument, but earlier I had to attend a memorial service for my uncle. Nevertheless, before I speak to some of the issues that identify as gaps, I just want to ask a question. This morning I was in Parliament and I presented a motion on asking government to consider enacting legislation that would make it mandatory to force people to, or force government to inspect meats, game meat, that usually is given to the public. One example is in Southern Africa in general, when there's a celebration, you slaughter goats, cows and everything, no one to inspect, it's just a public thing and everybody eats. Now, just last 30th September, when we celebrated our independence, the Minister of Environment issued licenses for communities to hunt elephants, elands, springbok, to feed people. And my challenge in Parliament is that the minister should have put in place systems where this meat could be inspected before it is cooked and given to, generally to the people. And I think that is a gap that I think you could help us maybe enact a law to ensure that there's nothing that is ingested without proper inspection. I'm not a health person, but something along those lines. But yes, I think also what we could be. I'm trying to get back to my notes. Yes, I think that said, I think also what we could be thinking of doing is to establish, especially in Southern Africa, we could be establishing within governments agency coordination framework where all government agencies that are involved get together to form a national One Health coordination mechanism. Am I audible that side?
Yes, can hear you loud and clear. Thank you very much.
And also, I think from Parliament side, I think the agencies, the interagency coordination framework could also be given a slot to regularly report to Parliament. And this should be supervised by Parliament, because otherwise things just fall through. We could enact laws, nobody implements, and nobody ensures that these things are actually implemented. That's one thing. And then we could also deliberately try to raise awareness amongst our public that there is a problem, and this is zoonotic diseases. And the example, as we all know, is the bats that is believed to have brought COVID. And once you speak about COVID, people get serious. So yes, raising awareness, in my view, would assist communities. Also, we could try to align our current existing policies and regulations and recommend updates to ministry guidelines to extend veterinary oversight for wildlife health. We should also try to provide training that involves veterinary personnel, general medical personnel, wildlife officers, and the police. That's just to create awareness amongst those who are required to oversee that there is One Health program. I think that is all. I've said a mouthful, I think.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Honourable Kawana, for those very interesting insights from one of the countries that was being looked at through this extraordinary project. Many issues there. I think the issue you raise about implementation, so the legal frameworks are a critical first step, but the implementation challenge and the raising awareness, and this issue of multidisciplinary training, which you ended with, bringing together people from across many sectors. So very much appreciated, very helpful for all of us moving forwards. I'd just now like to turn to Paula again, Paula Lopez, who is going to offer some observations from her perspective in Angola as another one of the countries that were targeted. Then I might, if you're happy with it, Susan and colleagues, I'll go to Q&A before we come back to other speakers. But over to you first, Paula.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. I completely agree with the proposition presented by Honorable Kawana. I think the countries of the region should and must work together. But since the presentation that we did on this topic within Angola and the summit that we had in Luanda, I'm happy to report that Angola made some very significant steps. Angola hosted in October this year veterinary training that was sponsored by the HOAH, the World Organization, and also open a new institute for research of animal diseases in Wambo. These are very significant steps for the improvement of the implementation of the law in Angola, and we are looking forward to see necessary enforcement and necessary studies, research, and implementation of what is stated on the law. I cannot speak for my parliamentarians, nor I cannot speak for the Ministry of Health, but I know for a fact there's been initiatives to review the laws and harmonize them, because Angola also is party of very important African Union documents which are relevant to this topic. And since the country is being very affected from 2024 and this year with some outbursts of diseases, now Angola is very dedicated and committed to do these changes as soon as possible, as to bring along the other ministerials to fight for this problematic. So we are looking forward to 2026 to work closely with our caucus and our parliamentarians to study which are the relevant amendments on the law and coherence policies that must be addressed. And we are looking forward that this project continues, so we have the necessary expertise and aid to implement those changes.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paula. And we join with you in hoping this project can continue to provide the sort of support that's been so valuable and clearly appreciated to date. What I would like to do now is we've got a couple of questions. I'd like to just pose these questions, go to a couple of you, and then I'll come to Susan and to colleagues from GIZ to wrap up. But I'd just like to come to the questions, and I'm going to cluster them, and I'm going to come to you, Dalia, and you, Jim, I think. One question is around the extent to which climate change is driving a new or shifting zoonotic disease risk. So I'm going to come to Dalia about that, whether we're seeing any impact of climate change here. The other question relates to the issue of legislation and whether one should be rather modest in one's expectations to start with and build up legislation over time, or whether or not one should try and do some comprehensive legislation from the start. And Jim, I might come to you then and then open it up to see if any colleagues would like to add. But Dalia, first on the climate change question, and then Jim, you on the how ambitious one might want to be with legislation.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, in the sense of climate change, yes, of course there is going to be an impact. Why? Because there is a warmer temperatures allow disease carrying animals, could be rodents, could be bats, could be mosquitoes. There are vector-borne diseases. That means that it's a disease that it doesn't really come from a vertebrate, but it will be an animal through a mosquito bite that we can be exposed to these diseases. So yes, climate change is an impact. It's very important not to isolate climate change. There are many things that interact. Climate change is a result of habitat loss. Habitat loss as well produce microclimate changes. So it's really complex. So we don't know the extent of climate change and the other impacts we're having together. All these compounded impacts are going to have. That's something that experts on the area are trying to predict and are researching. But what is expected is given all these changes that we're expected to have more emerging zoonotic diseases.
Thanks, Dalia. I appreciate that. Jim, I'm going to come to you for a brief answer on the legislation one, but Honourable Kawana, I'd also like to come to you after Jim to get your perspective on how ambitious legislation may be from the outset and whether one starts modestly or whether one starts to try and have comprehensive legislation from the start. But Jim, let's go to you, and then Honourable Kawana, I'd like to invite your observations. Jim?
Thank you very much. Very good question. I don't think that I've actually heard it phrased that way before. And in the last 30 seconds, I've been trying to formulate an answer. I don't think, though, that there is a one-size-fits-all response. I think it really depends on the capacity of the country, what their starting point is, and what you can expect from, the implementing side when it comes to the legislation. I think that there are countries that are in a position to move comprehensively. But I think that the answer to whether you're comprehensive in the beginning or not is a function of an understanding of the capacity. But I think it's an understanding of really what is the impact of different aspects of the legal puzzle, right? Not all changes to law have the same impact when it comes to capacity building requirements or finances or actual activities. There are aspects of law that are sometimes neutral. There are some pieces of the puzzle that really do require significant investment. As an example, if the law is going to require new forms of testing for health for wild animals, as was just explained by the Honourable Kawana, that might actually imply more effort, therefore, and some training, maybe even some capacity building in terms of that kind of testing to be able to do it in a short period of time. So you'll have some impact, but then again, maybe that impact is relatively small compared to putting in the law a surveillance requirement. So I suppose the answer would be what you need is a measured response, whether that's comprehensive or more sort of humble in its beginning as a function of an understanding of the country's capacity. That would be my thinking on that.
Thanks, Jim, and that's very much from a person who's researched this area. We've got benefit of having Honourable Kawana with us, Member of Parliament. Would you like to comment on that in terms of the question around how ambitious is one to start with putting in place legislation around One Health and all of these issues we've been discussing today?
Thank you, James. Well, let me start by saying that, in my view, not all laws achieve the intended objective. And this is because of the interpretation. And not just the interpretation, but also because some remote areas revolt when laws are enacted. It's like a certain community is being targeted. But at the same time, it is important to enact laws, for us as Africans. I don't mean to say Africans are too slow, in a gradual manner. And if it comes like one big, bomb, then the communities may revolt in a way and start doing illegal things. But once they realize the benefits of the law, slowly you go to the next one until you achieve what you want to achieve. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Really valuable insights there in terms of how one may wish to proceed going into the future. With that, I'm very conscious of the time. I'm going to now invite Susan just to offer some brief observations in terms of, future use of the project's findings and potential next steps. And then I'm going to come for closing remarks to Anne-Kristen Konzak. She's an advisor with the Secretariat of the International Alliance Against Health Risk with the GIZ. So first to you, Susan, and then I'll hand over to Anne-Kristen.
Thank you, John. I'm going to be very brief. Thank you all for participating. When we started this project, we had the opportunity to be in person with the jurisdiction, the countries that were part of the project, but also members of parliament from 7 other countries in Washington, D.C. And the members of parliament from the other countries asked, why not us? We really feel like we can use this. And then at the final closing event, which was in person in Luanda, we had, it was a hybrid, and we also invited members of parliament from a number of other countries where the ICCF group and other partners work, and where we support parliamentary conservation caucuses. And again, the questions from Tanzania, from Congo, from numerous other countries was, we need this. We would really benefit from this on a national and regional level. So what I would say is, implementing this project in all the ways that Honorable Kawana and James, Paula, others have discussed on this webinar is critical, but we would be thrilled to have the opportunity as a partnership with Legal Atlas and in Wildlife Crime and GIZ to roll this out in other countries. We feel like it's needed desperately, and the success that was achieved in this short 2-year project shows that I think we can really move forward in a very productive and sustainable way with future funding. So with that, I will turn it back to you, John. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Very well said. And, it was clearly a very successful project, and Wildlife Crime, ICCF Group, Legal Atlas, together with Angola, Botswana, and Zambia, worked extraordinarily well together. I think the proof of the pudding is in the eating, as they say, in terms of the product that's been delivered. And we very much appreciated the support of the Alliance, GIZ, German government. And there could be no better person to wrap it all up for us than someone from the Alliance and GIZ who's with us now. Over to you, Anne-Kristen, for closing remarks, and thank you again.
Yes, thank you very much, John, also for your kind words, and also from our side, and especially also on behalf of the whole Secretariat team. Thank you very much for these fantastic insights and presentation on your work. So also just over the 2 years of all the things that you've conducted, it's very impressive to see. So thank you so much for your dedication on that as well. I will keep it short, as I said, because I also think that you've shown how important it is to have strong legal frameworks. I'm not going to go further into that. But I think another message that we always try to convey with the Alliance as well is that wildlife itself is obviously not the risk, but the interaction and the human-wildlife interface. So I think having strong relations on that is also very important. And another aspect that from the Alliance perspective, why this work or this project has been so important to us as well, is looking at our theory of change and our 2 central goals of reducing health risks in wildlife trade and stepping up the responses and also raising awareness. It's a very complex task to do that, and we have various fields of actions to do so, from social and behavior change to pathogen identification, to eventually looking at legal frameworks as well, of course. Because laws and regulations provide the authority, spending power, and capacity to turn legislative intentions into on-the-ground change. I think this also resonates a lot with what Jim has mentioned. And eventually, pandemic threat of diseases starts with local events. So I think it's very valuable to look at these national context to then also learn from each other. And I think this is where the Alliance has a big strength, to have these kind of national contexts to look at this, to support this work there. But then also with these events like now, bring it back to the community so we can all connect and learn from each other, and then also see that this is going beyond and just spreading in the community. So I think that was a great job that you did. So thank you very much on behalf of the whole Secretariat, and also to everyone who joined the meeting today. Thank you as well for your time. And also on behalf of the Secretariat, if there are any questions, please feel free also to reach out to us, and we're also happy to connect you. But I think the speakers have also shared on one slide their context. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to the speakers for your time as well. And have a lovely afternoon, morning, or evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ann-Kristin, and thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.